Hello, sparklers. Welcome back to Ignite Your Spark with me, your host, Kim Duff Selby. Today, my guest is Suzanne Culberg. And if you are familiar with me and have listened, you know that I love improv. I love theater. And one of the first rules of improv is always say yes. Well, my guest today says maybe you should rethink that, not in the same way, but she's a big proponent of saying no. And in this case, I totally agree. Suzanne helps overgivers and people pleasers, I know you're out there, learn to say no to others in a way that feels good so that they/you can say yes to yourself or themselves. And she has an online program called Why Wait, W8. And then she's helped hundreds of women break the cycle of putting themselves last and instead build the confidence to set boundaries. So let's learn how to say no for those of you over volunteers. And welcome, Suzanne. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Kim. I'm so looking forward to this discussion.
It's funny, Suzanne, me too, because reading this, people are really all about the just say yes to life, and that's totally different than what you are saying, if I have it correctly. But when my kids were younger and in school, my husband used to say that I had a big YES emblazoned on my forehead because someone would ask me to volunteer to do something. Okay, yeah, but I always wanted to, but I tended to fall into that people pleaser category. So I think that what you are telling us is very, very, very important. And particularly, it seems like women are the ones who tend to over say yes, correct?
100%, yes. And I love the example of the school because it's so common. Could you just bake cookies for this? Or could you sell chocolates? Or could you come to the parents and friends meeting? Or could you, volunteer to help the children read? Or so many things. And
Right. Well, but sometimes we really want to do that. And that's why I
yes.
did. But then sometimes you just say yes because you can't say no. But before we dive into this even further, because I do want to hear your story and how you got started in this movement of, why wait? And I want to ask you what I ask many of my guests, and take it however you want, but how do you ignite your spark?
It depends. There's a few different ways. So when I'm feeling blah, as we all do,
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
literally have a list of 10 things I can do for myself, by myself, in 10 minutes or less on my desk. And then I read through the list, much like you see a toddler who doesn't want to do anything. And then I ask myself, do you want to do this today? No. Do you want to do this? No. Do you want to do this? Uh-huh. So things on the list, and I review this list usually once a month, but sometimes once a quarter because, life. But when I find that, I'm feeling blah and I have no spark and I have no motivation, it can quickly turn into a Netflix binge and a chocolate binge, and then I'll do it next week. And finding a book series that I enjoy and reading the entire thing. So it's kind of like these little things are enough just to shift the energy in the moment, and that can be truly self-care rather than reaching burnout and needing aftercare, which is, that wind down time. So some of my top favorites are dance it out to a song, because songs usually go for 3 to 4 minutes. So you can usually get 2 songs in, but I literally take it down to the line item of which song do I like at the moment. Because when I'm really blah and unignited and spark free, I don't know what songs I like. I literally have a list there. Which one lights your fire today? And at the moment, it's this one. It's a mashup I found between Another One Bites the Dust, and I can't remember the name of the other song. It's on my list. But anything mashed with Another One Bites the Dust is very good to, and sometimes I listen, sometimes I dance, sometimes I sing badly. Other things like a shower, or if I can't do a shower, just washing my hands or washing my face. Water really helps me ground and reconnect. I'm a Pisces, not that I'm really into astrology, but I had my chart done once, and apparently 9 of my 12 houses are water or something, and it's next to impossible. And I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe that is
That makes
why
sense.
I reconnect with water so much. It could be listening to, a short segment of a podcast, something like this show, or something that, is inspiring me and brings me back to the moment and out of my, drudgery. It could be messaging a friend. Sometimes just cleaning, because like I know cleaning sounds terrible, but you have that shelf, or like right now I'm looking at my desk and I'm like, yeah, 10 minutes, imagine what I could do to that. Like, a small amount that gives you that shift out of blah into, like, I can see a sense of achievement of what I've done is often enough. Because if I look at my entire house, I'm like, that's going to be a couple of days project. I feel flat. But like, I can clean a desktop or a shelf or my kitchen sink, and just seeing it like just sparkle, it makes me feel good. Maybe I'm bizarre, but just the little things.
It's as if you studied ahead and knew exactly what to say. You had no idea I was going to ask you that, clearly, but the fact that you have a list blows me away. That is such a good tip and trick for people. Keep that list, because I always ask my guests, how do you ignite your spark? And many of them have said things like meditate, dance, walk, get out in nature. But I love the idea of having a list of different things that you can look at, and in under 10 minutes do something. It's basically to raise your vibration or lift your mood, however anybody wants to say it. That's so clever. I love that. I hope people take that to heart and use that if they don't have a way that they can easily and quickly ignite their spark. Thank you for sharing
I
that.
hope people do, but my advice would be, if anyone listening, don't do it in your head. We all do stuff in our head and then we forget it. And then in the moment when you're not, when you have a spark, this sounds great. Sure, I'll do it in my head. When you have no spark, you also have nothing in your head. Hence having it written down to be that visual reminder, and then read it to yourself. Because if you go, which one? You're going to go, nothing. But you literally read it out to yourself. Do I want to dance to a song? No. Do I want to meditate? No. Do I want to journal? Okay.
I love it. I'm going to do it as soon as we get off of here. And it's so true, writing down the exact songs, because when you're trying to find that in your head, you're like, I don't know what song makes me happy.
You get it. And then after a couple of months, you're like, I don't love this one anymore. So, it brings back my inner teenager where I'd play that song on repeat to my parents to be like, turn it off. Yeah.
That's so funny. Oh, thank you for sharing all of that. I really think that was important, and we needed to hear that today. So thank you. So I'm guessing that you started your business because you were a people pleaser and someone who always said yes. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes and no. So I actually started my business because I used to weigh twice what I do now, very much linked to people pleasing. So I started as a weight loss mindset coach. But I was never actually passionate. Like, I never had a spark about helping people lose weight. Like, I'm not saying that that's not important, it's not valid, but it wasn't my dream. Because if I never have to hear anybody talk to me about how cookies are bad or whatever again, my life would feel complete. Because to me, this is once again a result of, like, if you're not saying no when you really want to and you're saying yes to everybody else, then you get this place where it's little wonder you're staying up late watching Netflix and eating chips, because that's that one time where you're like, I can't do this anymore. And then what we tend to do is we look for the right diet or the right program or the right personal trainer. And to me, it was never any of those things. So technically the answer to your question is yes, I was a people pleaser. But even then I came about it in the wrong way, because I was so convinced that if I could just get my weight handled, everything else would be amazing. And then I got my weight handled and I was like, why am I still so, like, I wasn't unhappy, but I wasn't the happy, confident, like, sometimes we think when this happens then, and then this happens and it's not that. And it's interesting, after my weight, I dropped the weight, I decided I just needed money. So once I get this amount of money, and you have this little nest egg and that wasn't enough, and you have a bit more and that wasn't enough. And I was like, why are none of these things giving me what I thought I would feel? And then it was like, actually, what being able to say no and, sit with that discomfort of disappointing people, and then also realizing they can ask somebody else. Like the first time I heard someone say, well, that sounds like a personal problem, I was like, that is the most rudest thing in the world. But now I'm like, actually, it kind of is. Other people's problems aren't my problems. I feel so much free. Like, I'm not saying it doesn't mean I don't have compassion or I don't care, or I don't want to help. But if it's at the expense of myself and my family and other things, then yeah, it isn't. And that's when my spark was ignited.
Yeah, and you flipped a switch and said, "Oh, yeah." It's interesting. What came to me as you were talking about that is all the times that on Facebook for people's birthdays, they'll say, "For my birthday, I am donating to the wildlife preservation in wherever, or for cancer this, or for something that." And I look at those and I feel so guilty when I don't give. But I mean, these are people I may not have seen in 30, 40 years. We're just connected on Facebook. And sometimes I will give if it's a good friend, but if it's someone who I haven't seen or talked to, I think we get caught in that cycle of saying yes in that way too, of donating money because we feel badly that we're not. And I wish people would not do that, honestly, do that raise money thing. I know they're trying to do it for a good purpose, but there are so many ways that we say yes when we really need to think about saying no. Yeah, maybe you have the financial means to constantly give and give and give, and that's great if that's how you choose. But to give just because you feel like you should or you're being bullied into it almost, I think that's something we all need to learn as women in particular, to really think about it. And it's like self-preservation. Even if you
Oh,
have the financial means, maybe that's not what you should be doing. You need to think. And that just came to me because there's so many ways we say yes when we don't really want to,
oh,
and things that you
100%.
don't normally think about.
And the fundraisers on Facebook, or I remember my mother has cancer and my dad shaved his head to raise money, which was great and noble and amazing. But just because people didn't donate didn't mean they weren't understanding or caring or passionate about my mum's health. It
Right.
either, I think there's so many layers and levels to this. And I think sometimes we are passionate about something and we can inadvertently become pushy, not meaning
Mm-hmm.
to. Like, it's kind of like, I remember because I have a long dieting history. Whenever I'd start a new program, I'd be like, this is the thing. And my poor husband and his nascent eye roll is like, what are we going to have to eat for the next month? He never said it that directly, but you could just kind of, sense it. And it's like, just because you're passionate about something, if somebody doesn't share your passion, is a difference between them not caring about you as a person and them not aligning or wanting to invest in something, that you invest in. And I think it's such a great thing, because it's somebody that you're going to give a gift to anyway, like a family member or a close friend, and they're like, actually this year, Kim, rather than buy me a present, because you normally do, can you donate to this? In that case, I'd be like 100% sure. But if it's somebody, especially with a log sob story twisting thing, it's kind of like, am I really passionate about this, or do I feel obligated? And I never give from a sense of obligation anymore, because it's just not a nice energy for me to be in. Like, sometimes I will see things. There was something on Facebook recently that I was like, oh yeah, I will donate to that because I feel ignited by it, but not because I felt like manipulated. Not that I'm them being overtly manipulative, but you know what I mean.
Oh, I do. I know exactly what you mean. I mean, exactly. And I'm the same way. I rarely find myself saying yes to things now at this age, at this point in my life, that I really don't want to say yes to. Now, sometimes there might be a social gathering that I don't really want to go to because I'm tired or whatever, and you say yes. But we do want to take care of ourselves first. And I think there's also a fine line between taking care of yourself first and being kind to someone else. I don't know, that's not really exactly how I meant it to come out, but sometimes people, I find them being selfish because they say yes to themselves so much and don't give to others in
Oh
in
yes.
in a way. Does that make sense? And I
I
I
love how
lost my thought there for a moment,
this
but
thread might bring it back, I'm not sure, but I love how Brene Brown says clear is kind. So say
mm,
I'm invited to a social gathering and it's a week from now. I'm a highly sensitive introvert. So the first thing I would say is thank you so much for inviting me. I need to check my calendar, because when I'm in someone's energy or when I'm around them, of course I want to say yes. But then I might step back and go, do you really want to go? We've got this thing here called pub choir. Do you guys have that over there?
No.
Basically, they hire out like a hall or a stadium or a place, and it's a group singing thing. It's fabulous, but it's being around lots of people, and that is actually quite draining for me. So sometimes I'll be like, yeah, let's do it, and other times I'll be like, no, not today. So it's kind of like stepping back, thanking them from the invite. That's being kind. Like, I appreciate you inviting me. I need to check my calendar. Or, I appreciate you inviting me. I don't like crowds. Like, that's an honest. Like, I love that you love it. Have a fabulous time. If you want to do a smaller catch up, like go to dinner, go to a cafe, go to walk, like, what are you available for? And communicate that. And see how that, because sometimes I think people are afraid to say no because they think the other person will think they don't like them or they'll never invite them again. But just imagine, like, if you invite a friend to a movie and it's like a horror movie because you love horror and they say yes, and then you invite them to another one because they said yes the first time and they say yes, and then about 6 months into your friendship, they finally break down and say, I can't stand horror. Wouldn't you rather have been honest at the beginning and said, like, thanks so much for inviting me. Horror's not really my scene. Is there anything else showing that you want to see? Because the person's likely reaching out because they want to connect with you, and this is the medium that they thought of, rather than, and they could find another friend who likes horror. So, yeah.
Yeah, this is great. That is, to me, tip number one, is to be kind in the way that you are responding to something. I really appreciate how you said that. And I love Brene Brown and her wisdom. And I would say yes to anything she asked me to do.
100%.
But I get that. But I, again, at this point in my life, would say, oh no, I don't do horror, that kind of thing. But I also think, as I don't know about you when you were a teenager, but when I was a teenager, I tried to please boys because I wanted to be liked. And I was like a skinny little frizzy haired thing that, boys were not attracted to. So when someone wanted to go out with me or whatever, I would be like, okay, yes, I like that too. I think, unfortunately, I was not taught to stand up for myself, I guess. I don't know. I think it starts with us teaching our children that, take care of yourself first. Say,
100%. As
and
children, it's funny how much we people please because we don't want to be left out of the crowd. But when you think about it, conditionally, generationally, societally, if we were left out of the crowd, that would have mean death. Like, if we lived back when we were tribal, if you were kicked out of the tribe, you didn't have, like, you needed that community. Whereas now you can find another community, but our body, like our genetics, necessarily hasn't caught up with that. But then again, it's modeling it to the children. So with my children now, like my daughter, it's funny, there was this disco thing coming and she didn't want to go. And I was like, well, don't. And she's like, oh, but all my friends are going. And I'm like, if you want to go, go. But if you don't want to go, don't. But what would you like to do that you could invite your friends to? And she's like, oh, well, I'd like to go to the park. I'm like, well, let's just invite them there. Like, by you saying, no, you don't want to go to the disco, it's not, no, I don't want to be friends with you. It's just, no. And I think, especially as adults, sometimes we say yes, knowing full well we're not going to go. And then at the last minute, I'm sorry, I'm sick. Or we come up with some BS excuse. And then we wonder why the person's frustrated. And especially like those party plan things like Tupperware, candles or whatever. Like, if I clean my house and cater for you and you cancel on the last minute, I'm going to be much more irritated than if you were like, hey, Suzanne, thanks for inviting me. I can't stand plastic. But, if you want to do, like, be honest. It's not saying you shouldn't like it. It's just saying it's not my pleasure. Because what do? We say, sure, I'll come. We cancel on the day. Then we go, oh, next time. Knowing full well we don't want to come next time either.
Yeah. No, Suzanne, that's so great. And I love what you are, teaching your children. And I don't think I did that, but I also think, and this is not about children, this, what we're talking about, but what this brings to mind is I did make my daughter do some things because I felt she should, like do gymnastics because I knew she was good at it, or go, and she would get really anxious about, she's an introvert too, going. And now she thanks me for pushing her to do that. So people listening, I don't want you to think just let your kids have their way all the time. Sometimes there are things, but when it comes to a party or something that if they don't like the child who's giving the party and they're going to be miserable, I probably would have made them go. But in hindsight, I would say now, no, you don't want
Well,
to
it
go. You
really
don't.
depends. Like, I love the gymnastics or, the sport kind of example. So for my children, I encourage them, like they enroll in one sport type thing per term. And sometimes they go to a couple, and I remember my daughter wanted to do ballet. She's like, I want to be a ballerina. Like first lesson, she's like, I don't want to be a ballerina. And I'm like, that's okay. You don't have to be a ballerina, but you do have to follow through on the commitment of the term that I have paid for. So,
Right.
and then next term, we can explore another dream. So it's kind of like letting them learn to understand fulfilling on a commitment. Or if they say yes to a party, like a birthday party, and then they have a falling out with a friend or like, whatever, kid stuff, or someone said something about them or whatever. And I'm like, we are not cancelling on the last day. That is that child's birthday party. Imagine if it was you and you were the kid there waiting for your friends to come and you're sitting amongst your balloons and crying. Like, no, following through on commitments is different than actually not making the commitment in the first place. And I think that's why when people first come across me, like the nope coach and saying no, I'm like, there's a difference between saying no at the outset and then on the day it rolls up not wanting to do it. Like if you're legitimately sick, obviously, like,
Right.
saying
But if you
yes
just,
and then later saying no, or not wanting to do something, no, I always follow through my commitments.
yeah, no, I get it. But most of the majority of my listeners are probably not parents of young kids right now. So let's get into the why wait and how some more tips perhaps on how you would help people to say no in order to take better care of themselves and put themselves first.
Well, it's kind of looking at what is your capacity. So sometimes and there's categories of this. Like you might have an elderly parent or an elderly neighbor who, if something happened, you would be there in an instant. Like you would move everything around because that is a legitimate requirement. Obviously say yes. But sometimes there will be somebody asking for something that you may have said yes to before. Like, could you just pick me up some milk, or could you pick up my scripts, or, could you do something that actually is inconvenient for you? So I have an example. Recently, my sister came to visit. She lives interstate. It was fabulous. And then she was going to a sports match about 40 minutes from here. And I said to her, so you've booked your parking? Because she'd hired a car. She's like, what do you mean book your parking? I'm like, in Sydney, honey, you got to book parking or you might not get it. And I sensed like the panic in her face. And I was like, if you want to leave your car here, I can drive you there. You go to the sports match, stay overnight, catch the train back here tomorrow and pick up your car. And she's like, oh, well, I don't want to catch a train. And I was like, well, okay, but maybe get an Uber or something. Oh, I don't want to pay for that. And I'm like, so? And she's like, well, can't you come get me? And it was so funny because it was like, on the weekend, I can drop you there. There's no worries at all. But during the week, like that's into my work time. And she's like, well, you work for yourself. Can't you just reschedule? And it was just the most fascinating thing. In the past, 100%. Family was here. I'll drop everything. And I was like, me rearranging my clients who are paying me because my sister doesn't want to catch a train. That's a no from me. So we ended up having it wasn't a comfortable conversation. So in the end, she was like, well, I'm just going to risk it for the biscuit and see if I get a car spot. And she was fortunate, so she did. But it was kind of like, if someone doesn't want to put themselves out, but they expect you to put yourself out, that's where you kind of have to be like, yeah, that may be a no from me.
Yeah, I'm so proud of you. I don't know you well, but I'm so proud of you. Why do you think it is that intrinsically it is so hard for us to say no? What is that?
I think it's conditioning, like especially, from young age. A good girl is accommodating. A good girl is polite. A good girl helps out. And, yes, those things are important. But at what point is it like when you put yourself out to help? And also if the person doesn't want to help themselves, like it's like if I give you legitimate solutions, you can catch a train, oh, I don't want public transport. You can catch an Uber, oh, I don't want to pay for that. But you want me to cancel my day to run around after you, like that's a no. So I think, and also in family, we just tend to, oh, it's family. Oh, it's family. But it's kind of like there is a difference between family, as I said, in legitimate needs. Say she needed to go to the hospital or something. I don't care what I've got going on. I'm there. But you don't want to catch a train? No.
Yeah, I like you said that legitimate needs. It's as if we don't set boundaries around ourselves. And that's very, very important to set the boundaries and be kind. And I think people will actually appreciate that more and come to expect that of you and would only ask you something that was really important to them, that they really felt comfortable asking you to do for them. Setting boundaries is something that we have to learn, and it's not something that we are brought up with.
Exactly. And also, it will vary from person to person, to situation. Like, say, for example, you're in a workplace and the boss says to you, can you stay back and finish this report? It's going to take 5 minutes, because, everything's going to take 5 minutes.
Right.
But it takes 2 hours and you do it. And then the next time they ask you, you do it. And the next time they ask you, you do it, until you reach the point. Like, you usually have this little resentment that builds and builds and builds until it's seething. Yeah. And then you kind of explode. And then you're like, my boss sucks and everything. Whereas if you'd actually said, like, Kim, I did it. It's done. Like, this is great. It didn't actually take 5 minutes. It took me 2 hours. So, next time, if this comes up again, I'm going to need to be told by 3, or, something like this. And I think, as a generalization, men do this so much better than women. Yeah. So since COVID, my husband's been working from home. He still does. They've transitioned it. That's been kind of fabulous for time with the children. But I heard him on a phone call. I don't try to overhear, but house, office, it's small. And I hear his end of the conversation, and he's like, okay, so which of these is the priority one? And then I can't hear the other side. And he's like, you're not understanding me. There can only be one priority one. Like, I can only do one thing at a time. And then there's no conversation, and he says something else. And eventually he's like, if you don't tell me which thing that you want me to do, I will just choose which is the most fun for me. And I just loved that, because he's like, I can do one thing at a time. You can give me 10 tasks. But I think, in general, women will be like, sure. And then we try and do them all, and we either do them poorly, or we just stay back, and the work creep becomes, but he was just so clear. He's like, there can be one priority one, like, I can do one thing. And if you're not going to give this to me, I will choose. And I just love that.
I do too. I mean, it must be societal. It must be the way that's a whole other conversation and, a whole other dimension. But men do have a much easier time saying no and prioritizing. Perhaps they're not prioritizing themselves, but they're prioritizing their work, or they're prioritizing their family. And yes, prioritizing themselves. But I think it's a little bit different, because I also feel like as women, we are better at self-care than men. And, we all need to really marry both sides of us, the feminine and the masculine, and all of those things. I'm always encouraging my husband, get a massage. You really need that.
Yes.
Do this, do that kind of thing.
Or go to the doctor and get that cough checked out, or something. It's like, it'll be fine. It's like, no, go.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We have almost gone past our time. I can't believe it. But before we really wrap up, this is so interesting. When people come to you, do they come to you as a coach to help them? What are the reasons they come to you? Because they can't say no, or because they are overwhelmed in life? Is it more like traditional life coaching? And I know you are also an NLP practitioner, or I guess you just say neurolinguistics practitioner. You are certified in NLP. And does that play into your coaching work as well? I was just curious, like, if someone was overwhelmed in life, what would make your style of coaching, learning how to say no, be relevant to them?
So most people who come to me have a goal of some sort, whether it be start a business, save an amount of money, lose weight, stop overworking, and they've tried everything. They've I've done all the plans, I've done all the blueprints, I've done all this, but I just can't seem to do the stuff that I want to do. And then the work I do with them and the work we do in My Weight, it's a mixture of, coaching, like somatics. I've also trained in a Sacred Depths Practitioner, so like bringing it back into the body and the energy, and boundaries and self-care rather than aftercare, because often we wait till we're burnt out and then what becomes aftercare. But it's like basically how to have difficult conversations, how to prioritize self, how that self-care and self-first isn't selfish, and what all these things feel like in our body. Because so often we eat or scroll or shop or do something to not feel. So then when we start to feel again, it can be quite uncomfortable because we're not used to it. So it's like starting to identify, like, I believe a lot of us live our lives from the neck up, and it's about really experiencing life in our bodies again and in a community. So we realize we're not alone, because so often we think, oh, I can never say that, I'm the only one. And as soon as one person in the program has an admission or has a share, and it usually opens up, everyone's like, oh my gosh, me too. The conversations that, we don't have out in the world, because we're supposed to look Instagram ready and,
Right.
picture perfect, but what's actually going on behind the scenes. So navigating that is the work that I do, and realizing that we all have a lot more to appreciate and doing a lot better than we think we are. And when we stop comparing and despairing to the what's put on social media, we have a whole different experience of our lives.
Yeah. Oh, Suzanne, I really love how your approach is quite different than other life coaches. And I guess that's because of your own personal journey by figuring out, oh, losing the weight. Well, now I'm not who I thought I'd be. Having the money, well, that's not right. And feeling in your body. I'm very much a believer in that. I'm yoga lover, got certified. I saw that you are also that way. I really feel that getting grounded in our body is so important. But I do that scroll thing when I don't want to think. I know exactly how to put off thinking. And I love
And then
how
it
you
actually
work.
makes it worse. I call that doom scrolling, because not
Oh
only are you
yeah.
not thinking, but then you're like, oh my gosh, they're so much better than me. She's prettier, she's skinnier, she's richer, she's this. But we don't know, because we're only seeing what they put on social media. Like, well, the social media is the picture. You're comparing your everyday life to someone else's highlight reel.
Right. But honestly, I was talking to my yoga instructor this morning and I was like, and she said something about my posts, because I always post about my podcast, which you will see next week when yours is released. I always do a video of me talking about my guests because I like people to hear how I felt about my guests.
It's a
And
great
then I
idea.
go back and I look at the pictures. I'm like, oh my God, my hair, I didn't put makeup on, I do this. And because I don't always, I mean, I always put lipstick on. I'm going to be honest right there, because I'm over a certain age, we put lipstick on. And she said, no, it's great that you're just you. You don't, you're not caring. But when I go back, I compare, but when I'm doing it in the moment, and sometimes it's important to live in the moment and be yourself in the moment on social media, because that's the real you. But I sure look at those other gray haired models and I'm like, damn, they look good. They look better than me. We do it. We all do it.
It's fascinating you should say that. Like, when I was earlier in business, before I didn't have a website and I had a website made, I went and got my photos professionally done, and I never wear makeup, and I got an outfit and whatever. My clients were like, that's not you. We love that your mum bun, ridiculous t-shirt, no makeup, whatever. So now if
Right.
you look at my website, it's totally me,
I
because
know.
I've worn makeup for exactly 3 occasions in my life: my wedding, my graduation, and my first lot of business photos.
Oh, I love makeup. I mean, I love how
But
it
if you
enhances
do,
my.
that's the thing. If you love
But
it,
you're
great. If
young,
it's you, but if
right?
it's not you and you're doing it because this is how a website's supposed to look, or this is whatever, then that's a different story. If you love the thing, great. But for me, I'd rather spend half an hour reading my book than doing
You
up my
know,
hair and face.
and you're going to attract people who want a real person. And you, by example, are giving them permission. Oh, I don't have to be a certain way. I can work with this woman, Suzanne, because she's down to earth. That's who she is. I don't have to try. I don't have to pretend. I don't have to say yes to wearing this, that, or the other thing. It's really important, I think, that you serve the people who are going to come to you and you are the example. And that's all we can do, is be an example of our best selves in order to bring out the best selves of others. And you, of course, have all these modalities, the somatics, the NLP, and the coaching that you work with them in order to assist them in really, I say, igniting their sparks. That's what it all comes back down to for me.
I love that. And the thing is, I love that thing, igniting your spark, because what sparks you might be different to someone else. And sometimes I
Oh,
think when we try things and they don't work, instead of beating ourselves up and thinking I'm a failure, hey, that just wasn't for me. Like
Right.
this thing, I thought it'd be great. I gave it a go. It wasn't really my thing, but now I know, that this isn't for me. I can try something else.
Yeah. Suzanne, I really love your approach. I really do. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners about why wait or take care of yourself or
Oh, if you
say
want to check
no?
out Why Wait, head over to my website. I'm pretty sure you'll put the link in the show notes at
Yeah.
suzanneculberg.com. It's got all the information. Whether you're interested in Why Wait or not, you are enough exactly as you are. And one of my favorite quotes of all time is, "You're a masterpiece and a work in progress simultaneously." It's by Sophia Bush. Because I think sometimes we think we can get stuck in the then. When I lose weight, when I make the money, when I meet the husband, when I have the kids, like then I'll be happy. And then every time you do the thing, it's like, well, this didn't result in how I hoped. So, you can be the masterpiece. I have enough. I'm abundant. I'm awesome. Everything's great. And I also want more. Like, they don't have to be exclusive. Your best gets to get better. And I think when you live in that, like, I want this thing, I desire this, but it's not going to complete me. Like, my life's already awesome. It just changes. There's not that pressure. Well, I didn't feel that
Yeah.
pressure with my life anymore. So if you can be like, okay, I do desire this, but it doesn't mean that I need to downplay or make less of where I am now. There's so much freedom in that.
Oh, do you work with people in the US too? I know the time is a little,
Worldwide, baby, because
yeah.
my program is run online, like via Facebook and Zoom, and then I do calls at different times to allow for time zones. So just after you and I finish here, I've got a call for my US peeps, and then in the evening I'll have a call for my UK peeps, and then Australians guys just slot in wherever. So
Ah, and you're in Sydney or outside of Sydney?
I'm just outside of Sydney, about an hour from the bridge.
Oh, cool. I love that. This is one of my favorite things about this podcast and connecting with people all across the world. And thank you for getting up so early to do this because it's 7 a.m., everybody, Suzanne's time. So I wouldn't be quite as perky at 7 a.m. as she is. But anyway, Suzanne, I'm just so thrilled this worked out and the universe brought us together because I really love your approach. And I think what you are doing in the way that you are presenting yourself and your ideas about self-care and in terms of saying no, it's really what we need. It's really what we need. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Kim. This has been fabulous.
Wonderful. Hey, friends, I want you to not just say yes to everything. Go out, ignite your spark, perhaps by saying no and taking care of you. And thanks for tuning in. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please share it. Subscribe, maybe comment, give me 5 stars if you think it's worth it. And I know you do because Suzanne was fabulous. So thank you, everybody, and shine on.